Hello and welcome to episode 228 of First Geek 411. I'm your host, Cameron Franklin, and with me, as always, from West Coast, Best Coast, Emma, how are you doing?
Ah, I almost made a weird noise right at unmuting, but I remembered this time that
Yeah.
we were going.
Say, and I even remembered to tell you that we were unmuting. So,
So I did not.
yeah, unlike last time when I was over here, like, it'll be fine. But this week it is just the two of us, and so we're hanging out and chatting. We're going to catch up. We are going to talk about some censorship with Roald Dahl. And I'm going to give some first impressions of Ant-Man Quantumania, since I went and saw that over the weekend. Before we get into all of that, you can find us, as always, on our social media as OneGeek411. You can also join our Discord server if you want to hang out. And then you can shoot an email to us over at 1stgeek411@gmail.com. You can watch live on Twitch Monday nights at 6:45 Mountain Time and find the videos over on our YouTube where you can like, comment, and subscribe. If you have seen Ant-Man, drop your spoiler-free thoughts in the comment section.
Spoiler free because I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah. And then you can find us over on our Redbubble store. So before we get into the news, Emma, what have you been up to?
Let's see. First things first, I watched The Last of Us this week. Finished. I watched the first half last night before bed and finished the second half this morning. Great episode. We got the monkeys. We technically got the giraffe, just in a poster in the background. And I successfully made a loaf of bread in the sense that it was a successful loaf of bread. I say that because the last couple have not been super successful, but they've been tasty anyway. And the most important thing...
Go ahead. No, go ahead. We'll circle back.
Okay. The most important thing that has happened this week is that yesterday morning, very early in the morning, my little nephew was born.
Congratulations.
It's the first niece-nephew child of a sibling, and it is very exciting, and I fly out on Wednesday to go meet him, and I just cannot wait to meet little baby boy, and everyone is happy and healthy.
That is great news.
So,
big congratulations to the family.
Yeah.
I'm excited that you're going to get to go visit.
Yeah.
And so with that, since Emma is going out of town, we are going to be postponing book club. I'll mention that again at the end of the show. But this is obviously much more important. And so
Yes.
with her being gone, we were going to delay book club. But I hope you send the family the best wishes from us here at First Geek.
Will do. Were you going to ask something about the bread?
Yes, I was going to ask something about the bread. And so what was it that made this bread more of a success than the other ones, since the other ones were tasty? Because to me, that would be the sign of success. The other ones were tasty.
It's just that this one actually, rose properly when I made the dough, whereas the other ones did not rise, but this one did. So that was, the success of it. I mean, obviously I'm going to eat the bread whether or not it rises because I made it and it's going to be good. But this one is actually the sourdough starter is doing what it's supposed to be doing in that regard. So it actually rose properly and it's not just a super dense loaf of bread.
Nice.
Yeah.
As someone who knows very little about baking, and basically it's all from the Great British Bake Off, that's about the extent of what I know baking wise. So
yep.
I needed some additional help there because I do not understand.
It rose properly. So it's a nice, very pretty loaf of bread.
Nice. So from me, also watched The Last of Us. I will say this is probably the one I'm most bitter about having some changes from the source material. Even though I think that they are positive changes and I completely understand why they did what they did. There are definitely some parts in this that I was like, oh, I'm sad that that's different. And Again, I think it's for the best. I don't think that like ruined the adaptation because they changed a little bit, especially compared to some of the other stuff that they've changed. It has very obviously been for the better. But yeah, this is one that like, again, it was just like, this is the one thing that like caught me, and I don't want to go into it because it's a bit of a spoiler, but we'll talk.
Is it the thing at the very end?
Yes. Yeah.
Because that I don't remember happening in the game.
Yeah. It's very different.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. We'll talk offline.
Yeah.
Or people can also talk in our Discord server. We do have a specific HBO Last of Us channel, so that if people want to chat there, they can. And so that's a big thing that we have going on there. Also have been watching Star Wars The Bad Batch. Really enjoying where we've gotten to this season. It took me a little bit to get into it. Like there were definitely some like side stories at the beginning of this season that I feel like were kind of hit or miss. But I feel like they are starting to, or not starting, it's been the past couple weeks, but they're like picking up the pace and they're starting to kind of get into the Bad Batch stories that I really enjoy. And so, have you seen Bad Batch?
I've seen bits and pieces, but not in completion and or all the way through. So, bits and pieces.
Yeah. I highly recommend season 1. I think we're only on season 2, but I think that season 1 is a very good set of Star Wars stories. The Bad Batch is
on Disney.
Yeah.
I guess that would make sense.
Yeah.
Of course it's on Disney.
The animation's super fun. I really like how they do it. And so as someone that kind of like fell in and out of the Clone Wars just because of the sheer amount of content that's there, the Bad Batch has much tighter seasons. And so I definitely recommend checking that out.
Dude, she has a saber bow?
Yeah,
Whoa.
There's a character named Omega who has a like energy bow and arrow, and it is the most like, we designed this so that we could sell toys of it, and I love it so much. Like
I would buy that
if
I had the money.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in the camp of like, there are people like, oh, they just made porgs so that they can sell merch, and then I'm over here like, but porgs are so cute. Look at all the merch you can get of them.
Yeah.
So I say that again, not as a complaint towards it, but it very clearly has that like design aesthetic. But yeah, it is super cool. Omega is a great character as well. There's some cool stuff there. And so, again, obviously to each their own, but I definitely recommend Bad Batch season 1.
It is now on my list. So I will watch it eventually. Keyword eventually.
Eventually. At some point in time, it will be watched. And so then I've been playing some more Magic the Gathering for Phyrexia. All Will Be One. I won my first draft finally. And so the way that drafting works on Arena is you play till you get 7 wins or 3 losses. And I had been getting several like 5 or 6 win drafts, and I could just not get a 7 win to get like the maximum prizes. And actually I think yesterday I finally got a 7 win, and I'm like, yes, thank you. Like, shake off my hands. Like, we're good. Step back. Super excited to finally do that. Yeah, I'll probably do a little bit more, but not for a couple weeks. It's just like such a fun way of like learning the format to play draft. And we got some big announcements this weekend for Magic. So like with that, I'm also now in like, do I save my free currency for that? Here we are, like that kind of thing, since I'm free to play.
Yes.
And so,
keyword yes.
Keyword yes. Let's see. Also on the game front, Deanna and I played Parks for the first time in quite a while, which is a very fun board game. Have you heard of this game, Emma?
No, but my brain immediately went to imagining it as like Roller Coaster Tycoon, but for city parks.
That would be that's a fun premise. So one of the things that I love about it is it's a super chill game. It's legitimately about going on hikes and visiting the national parks. Like that's the theme. And like,
I love that.
Yeah, you win by having the most fulfilling year. And so like as you go, like instead of like doing things like collecting metal or like weapons, you're getting sunshine and spending time in the rain and like
Going out in nature.
yeah, like finding wildlife and taking photos. It's such a fun chill game. And it's super fun. And so we've played it before, but it had been a long time. So this was kind of our like relearning the game since it had been a bit. We picked up the expansion for it, and our intention had been to play with the expansion, but then we realized we had no clue what we were doing and that we kind of needed to go back to the base game. So
sounds about right.
Yeah. But super fun game. Definitely recommend. And then the final game I've been playing over on twitch.tv/Karen plus Deanna is I've been playing through Fire Emblem Engage. I am on the final push, and I'm hoping to finish the game this week.
Ooh.
I'm on chapter 23 out of, I believe, 26 chapters. And then I have like 2 or 3 side missions to do. And so, but I'm now apparently way over leveled for the side missions. So it was, I thought they leveled up with you, but apparently they're just a static level.
You just go through them super quickly.
Yeah. And so I did one today that literally took me like 4 or 5 attempts and I could just not get through it. And then today I did it on my first try with no stress and just like chugged through it. And so I was like, yeah, I might be a little over leveled for these now.
Just a little bit. The things that are supposed to help you level up are just theirs.
Yeah.
Time fillers now.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that. And like it does unlock stuff. There's still some good things that you get as like some rewards. And so definitely need to go and knock all of them out before I finish the game, let alone to actually get the story of the side quest stuff. But definitely enjoying that game. Hopefully I'll have finished the game thoughts next week if we're not doing book club. So
yeah.
And then finally went and saw Ant-Man Quantumania this weekend. I'll definitely be talking about it a little bit more later on, but did go and see that. Excited to talk about it. We'll see if we are able to ever put together a spoiler cast for it. It'll obviously just kind of depend on if other people are able to see it. But
I'm going to try and get to it when I'm in Boston because I'll have a little bit of time off. So we can aim for a full-on spoiler cast when I get back.
Nice. Yeah, I have thoughts I'll say, but I'm going to save them for the other section.
You have thoughts?
And so,
good thoughts, bad thoughts?
You have to stay tuned for our topic later on.
Insert transition here.
Yeah. And speaking of transition, let's get into our discussion topics this week. We're going to start with my first impressions and spoiler-free thoughts on Ant-Man Quantumania.
You're welcome for that transition, Cameron.
I appreciate you, Emma. And so Ant-Man Quantumania, and again, completely spoiler-free. None of that. If we're able to do a spoiler cast later, that's where we'll have spoilers. So, and I'll say for people in chat, if you have any questions, again, no spoilery things, any questions you would like me to answer having gone to see it, please feel free to drop those in chat. We'll get to those as well. But Ant-Man Quantumania is the 31st MCU film.
Wow.
Which is insane.
Imagine that.
And opening weekend pulled in an estimated $104 million domestic, as well as another $121 million worldwide or international. So for a total of $225 million. This is coming from CNBC. Since the stat that I thought was interesting was 28% of ticket buyers opted for premium format theaters and were choosing to pay an extra $4.29 per ticket, which I thought was interesting. I have no clue what that is relative to other things, but
so that's like, the theaters with nicer surround sound,
like your IMAX,
IMAX type stuff over the
like
basic, yeah.
I was thinking more in terms of like how that relates to other films, like what is a good number there, that's more of what I was thinking. But because we go, I talk about this a lot. We go to Alamo Draft House. That's our preferred cinema, which I would assume would count in this premium format theaters. But we love the Draft House. We love the experience there. for this one, they actually had tiny menus that were like this big, and they gave everyone a magnifying glass so that you could read the menu.
That is great.
It was super fun.
I love independent / unique theaters.
Yeah.
We need more of those.
Yeah, and so it was really cool. It's been a minute since they've had a like unique menu like that. They're starting to get back into it. Like they used to do it for every major release, and then post COVID, they just haven't really had the bandwidth. So they've been kind of doing seasonal stuff, where it'll start at a specific movie, but then will run for the next 4 months or something like that. And so, definitely very fun. It was a fun just little difference thing. They did have some wings, like sriracha wings, that were on the menu, so I had those. Do not recommend eating wings in a dark theater. Like, they were really good, but it was definitely not the premium movie experience to be like in the dark trying to find these wings and trying to dip them and stuff. But I did this to myself, so.
You just walked out completely covered in wing sauce.
Yeah. Mistakes were made. Food was great, but mistakes were made. And so.
You mean choices were made?
Yes, choices were made, and they might have been mistakes. So.
Yes.
And so, for Ant-Man, also for what it saw in theaters, it was estimated to pull in 7 million patrons, and that is more than double what last year's Sony's Uncharted did with its President's Day release. And so, one of the things that I love about movie stats is it's always throwing shade at something.
Yep.
Like, you are either throwing shade at the thing or throwing shade at the thing it beat. Like, there's never like a middle ground. And so, like,
the hilarious thing about Uncharted is I started it and never finished it. I was just like, you know what? I have free access to this, but I just cannot finish it.
Yeah. I meant to go watch it once it hit, because I think it's on Netflix, right?
Yeah.
I meant to go watch it as soon as it did that, and I just never got there. So here we are. And I love Uncharted, but here we are. And Tom Holland, but yeah, never got there. But yeah, I just love that, like, Uncharted's over here, like, minding its own business, and then CNBC is just, like, throwing it under the bus. So,
oh, yeah.
So with all of that, there's been a big revival in the conversation around reviews and things like that, because Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania's Metacritic score is sitting at a whopping 48% out of 60 reviews, with 17 being positive, 34 being mixed, and 9 being negative. And so with this put me down the rabbit hole of what are the best and worst MCU movies according to the Metacritic. So, the answers may shock you. And so,
please don't tell me Black Widow is up there.
Well, we'll get to Black Widow. So, if you had to guess, what do you think the top rated MCU movie is on Metacritic? Oh, we're talking critics' ratings also, not user score.
One of the earlier ones, so like phase 1, phase 2. So I'm thinking Avengers or Iron Man. And if not those, something within those first 2 phases.
Okay. So Iron Man is number 2 with a 79%.
Yeah.
That shocked me that is the second highest average score at 79%.
What beat it?
At 88%, Black Panther. Which I think makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Rounding out the top 5 is Avengers Endgame with 78%, Guardians of the Galaxy with 76%, and then Captain America Civil War with 75%.
Interesting.
Yeah. I feel like that's a super...
Civil War?
Yeah. So the thing that shocked me there is that Avengers average review score is only a 69, as is Spider-Man Far From Home. And Avengers Infinity War is a 68.
I'm just amazed that that Civil War is up there.
Yeah. I mean, I really like Civil War. I think this is one that where like I was the outlier when we did our MCU ranking.
Yeah.
I put Civil War way above everybody else.
Yeah.
Um, but
Everything else makes sense
yeah, again, I
except
feel like
Civil War.
yeah, I feel like overall that's a like if you were gonna give people a bunch, that would make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So this then brings me to also I hate that Metacritic has Marvel Studios and it's just Marvel Films, which bothers me. So we have things that are clearly not Marvel Studios in this list.
Oh,
Metacritic, get it together.
like X-Men or whatever.
Yeah. So like the bottom one is Punisher Warzone, which released in
Yeah.
2008.
So they're basing it
Yeah.
off of the comic ownership rather
Yeah.
than
The actual studio.
yeah.
And so the bottom for MCU, excluding all the other ones that aren't Marvel Studios, the literal bottom, Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania at 48%, Eternals at 52, Thor Dark World at 54, Iron Man 2 at 57, and Thor Love and Thunder at 57.
Interesting.
And so and also tied with the original Thor at 57. That was on the previous page, so I had to flip back to get that one. But so kind of through all of this, and I'll get to my thoughts everywhere. This is not just trying to bury the lead, but like with all of that, I kind of wanted to ask you, and again, this is kind of some of the conversation that I've seen going around, is when you decide to watch, play, read something, how much do reviews matter to you? Like, is that something that you like really look into, or is that something that it depends? How does that work for you?
I like to look at reviews because I do. I'm just curious. But whether or not it determines if I interact with that thing doesn't always happen. So if the thing that I'm going to read, watch, play, whatever, is something I know I'll enjoy. So if it's part of an IP that I've seen previous stuff for, like Marvel or um uh the Subnautica games or something where I've basically already enjoyed other stuff that's part of that franchise, I'm gonna interact with it anyway at some point, um, and watch it or read it or play it because I know I like that content. Even if it's just a general genre that I like, I'm gonna interact with it. But with the reviews, like, um, I'll look at the reviews to kind of determine how and when I will. So like, um, if it's, if people are saying, oh, it's completely awful or just, not good, I may hold off on buying a theater ticket and spending $20 to go see it and wait for it to go to streaming so that I can save money or wait for it to go on sale. Because if it's just completely terrible, then it's just like, oh, well, okay. Like I'm still going to watch it because I like that thing, but I'm not going to spend $20 on it.
Yeah.
But if it's something that I've never seen anything by it or, part of it before, and I look at the reviews for it, then I'll be more hesitant to spend the money even if the reviews are good because it's more like, well, I don't know if I'm gonna personally like it. And I'll like ask a couple of people who have seen it or played it and be like, hey, did you like this? Do you think I would enjoy it? Whatever. So I don't really let it determine absolutely whether or not I watch it because I am going to anyway. It's more so just like when am I going to watch it and or how I'm going to watch it. So yeah.
Shanine is popping in chat, says, agreed with
Shanine!
Emma. If it's something I know I'll be playing, watching, reading, I won't look or care about reviews. If it's something I'm on the fence about, I'll look at reviews. And then I'm kind of right in line with that as well. there are very few times, Janine says, hi, friends. There are
Hi,
very few
Janine.
times where a review in terms of score has swayed my opinion. I'm a big fan of like the why, but like I feel like in general, the big issue that I have with reviews is that the numbers are meaningless. This is why when I went to us as a group and was like, hey, let's go and rank the Marvel movies, I wanted us to do a tier list, not assign a numerical score to them. And even within the
Yeah.
tier list, we're not trying to rate them versus each other. We're just trying to say, where do we think they would end up? Because those numbers are so hard to quantify that I feel like it's so meaningless. Like even looking at something like just different sites where, for example, IGN, their 7 is good. That's how they define a good product. And they actually recently put out an article about why so many things get 7s. And this is kind of like, it was a very insightful, like, well, if this is the scale, like, it's probably going to be good the majority of the time. And so, which was really interesting. But like, there are other people I know that, like, if something's not a 9 or 10, it's bad. And so I think there's that side of it again with kind of the ideas of the numbers being meaningless. And so, like, an example from me recently was Forspoken. And this kind of speaks, Emma, to what you were saying. Forspoken is the IP that I was most excited for in 2023. And it came out and it didn't get like bad reviews in terms of the actual number, but the things that people were saying about it made me less interested in spending full price on it compared to Fire Emblem Engage, which I think didn't even score that much higher than Forspoken if you look at score. Let me actually look that up. But the things that people were saying about it made me more excited about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And Forspoken, like, I played part of the demo for that one, and I was just like, even if this is, with gameplay that's comes about in the middle of the game, like, I don't think I would spend full price on it.
Yeah.
Like, that's another thing I'll do too, is if there's a demo of something that I can play, I'm going to before I spend money on it, just to determine whether or not I would actually finish the game.
Yeah. Yeah. And so for the record, Fire Emblem Engage is sitting at an 80 on Metacritic. Forspoken is a 63. So there's a bit more of a gap there than I thought there was.
Yeah.
But so, like, still using that example, while there is a radical difference there, or more radical difference, 17 points, I do feel like the complaints that people had about Fire Emblem, for me, are more like, okay, I would rather get this at launch rather than wait for a price drop, especially since it's Nintendo, probably not going to have a price drop for a while. But
yeah,
but I do think that that's a big part of it. In chat, B Scouts, who has been a first-time chatter throughout the stream so far, says reviews from me are really only ever something I look out for, like art supplies, so I can gauge the quality of the product. For media and such, I go almost entirely by what looks interesting to me. Otherwise, I ignore whatever else. And I think that that's a big difference there too. I am 100% what's the reviews when I'm going to a new restaurant, or when I am like shopping for products on like Amazon or something like that. I am very much like, if you can't convince the Amazon masses that the product is decent, it's not worth my time.
exactly.
And so I 100% agree there. And so, and then, yeah. And so, like, for me, going into Ant-Man, where like I had seen the reviews, I had kind of tried to do my best to like look into what people were saying. That was kind of the perspective that I went into the movie, which is kind of why I wanted us to have this discussion before I got into my thoughts. So I will say overall, I really enjoyed Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. Probably just referred to here as Ant-Man. I'm definitely not going to say the full name.
Within this context.
And so I really enjoyed it. I definitely felt that this is going to be a movie where the degree to which these things bother people is what's going to make or break it for people. So using another MCU reference, I enjoyed a lot of the humor in Thor Dark World. Or Thor, not Dark World. Nope. Not bad. In Thor Love and Thunder. I enjoyed a lot of the humor there. I loved the goats. For me, the goats hit. And every time the goats showed up, I laughed. But I know other people that hated that. That was like their worst part of the movie for them was that the goats kept showing up. They did not think that joke was funny. And so to use that as an example, everything that I saw as a review for Ant-Man, I think is 100% accurate. There are some major complaints. To me, one of the biggest ones is that Wasp doesn't really get to do anything on her own. Like, she does some really cool stuff, but it's always her with her parents, or her with the team, or her and this huge army fighting. There's not necessarily a moment where she gets to do something cool on her own, which I do think is a big letdown, considering she's one of the titular characters in the film.
Yep.
And so one of the big things in the reviews that I'd said is that why is she even in the title? She's barely in the movie. And so I went and watched the movie. I'm like, oh, she's in it a lot. But I think, to me, how I like the way that I internalized it is that difference between she's not necessarily moving the plot forward in a lot of ways, which I think is a very big letdown. Another example is, I know for some people, Kang didn't land as the villain or as the introduction, especially with it being Ant-Man versus Kang. And to me, it did. I really liked Kang. I liked this setup. I like the outs that they had. And I like that, again, without going into spoilers, I liked the resolution to the film. I think it does some great stuff to set up Phase 5. And then I do think that there was way too much CG in this movie. That's definitely one of the complaints that I saw in reviews that I do 100% like. This is the type of movie that I would be surprised if there was really sets built for this. Like,
I saw a comment about that on Twitter, I think, that was comparing it to the sets that were built for Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. And I responded to it with just, which is true, the fact that I just miss practicals.
Mm-hmm.
Like, as someone in the film industry, we don't take or just take the benefit of practicals as much anymore. Like, in the second Star Wars movie, when they're on the ice planet in the beginning, like
Empire Strikes Back on Hoth.
Yeah, and he's like trying to like grab the lightsaber with the Force. They literally just tied a fishing wire to that and had it in his hand and just pulled it out of his hand with fishing wire, and then put it in reverse when they edited it, and it worked beautifully. Like, things like that, it just, like, it plays so much better, and we don't take benefit of that anymore. And like, big sets, like, yeah, production costs can be expensive there, but just take it away from the CG and it's gonna look more believable. And it's like, then the actors have something to actually interact with, and you're gonna get a better performance from them. And it's like, definitely. Practicals, guys, they're so cool.
And one of the other things I saw called out is, like, because so much is CG and you're in the quantum realm, it's really hard to get the sense of scale of what's supposed to be going on. Like, a good example that I heard is in one of the previous Ant-Mans, when Ant-Man is the size of a building, I understand that scale because I know how big a building is. But when Ant-Man is big in the quantum realm, don't necessarily understand the scale of that as much. It's a bit harder to grasp. And so that's another one there. In terms of characters, again, I'll say I liked Kang a lot. Very menacing. I love that they're letting Jonathan Majors play these very different versions of the same, like, type of character. But, like, getting He Who Remains in Loki and then getting him as Kang the Conqueror here. it's super cool to see the different sides as he plays these different parts. And these different, like, personalities is the wrong word because they're variants, but like plays these different versions of these alternate history or alternate versions of the same character. I think that's very fun. And it's kind of the first time we've really gotten to see that. We haven't really had a variant that, like, we really got to see it have a radically different personality. Like even Loki versus Sylvie, like they still pretty much have the same personality. There's some slight differences, but you know, like in general, they're the same. So I loved that. I liked the new person that they got for Cassie. Still not necessarily huge on how that whole thing shook out. With them replacing the actor without telling her. Yeah. And so she found out that when the role was announced for this that this new person was cast for it. And so,
along with everyone else. Yeah.
Yeah. Like that's super like poor way to treat somebody.
Yep.
And so definitely like not a huge fan of that. That doesn't necessarily pertain to the movie itself, but in terms of the film as a whole, or production as a whole. And then, what was I going to say? Man, Paul Rudd. Like,
Paul Rudd.
Yeah. I feel like, especially as a pair, I could watch Paul Rudd and Jonathan Majors in just about anything.
I believe that.
Like,
yeah.
They're both so good. Both of they're so charismatic. And I really enjoyed that. And so, for some questions, I asked the co-hosts for some questions. And again, if you're in chat and you have any questions that you would like me to answer, again, spoiler free, let me know. And so, first question we had: as someone who is suffering from Marvel/superhero burnout, what makes this one worth seeing worth seeing in theaters? And I believe these are both from Shanine. Correct me if I'm wrong, Emma. So I'll say that I think the biggest benefit to watching this one is that it does set up Phase 5. And happy to report, I think it, at least in my opinion, it sets up Phase 5 way better than Black Widow set up Phase 4.
Good.
Again, just because every film comparison is throwing something under the bus. But
even if Black Widow didn't suffer from COVID issues.
Yeah.
You know.
So I do think it's a great setup for Phase 4. I do think that for all the complaints about the quantum realm, it does look really cool. And it did look really cool to see it on the big screen in theaters. Does that mean that you shouldn't, or that you should go see it in theaters? Honestly, I feel like if you're probably suffering from Marvel burnout and it's not like calling to you, I don't know if it's really going to change your mind unless you just like really loved the Ant-Man films. I don't necessarily know if that's going to, in chat, Shanine says Black Widow shade.
Side eye.
And so, yeah, so again, I don't know if that's going to change your mind. I don't know if it's going to like revitalize the genre after 31 films, but I definitely enjoyed it, and I'm happy that I did see it on the big screen.
I'm telling you, man, Stranger Things. Doctor Strange 2 had a chance to revitalize, but it just didn't.
It just did not. It
just didn't.
It was not multiverse enough, nor was it madness enough.
It had the opportunity to, and they were on the right track, and then directors went and made some terrible choices, and then things got screwed up.
Yeah.
I'm not petty at all about that one.
And so, yeah. So again, I don't know if this is going to change your mind. And then how does this stack up to the OG Ant-Man? And how does it stack up to the Ant-Man sequel? I still feel like the first Ant-Man did the best in terms of the scale of the character. You got to see really cool, but I guess we didn't get to see him get big yet. That's not until the sequel. But you got to see really fun stuff with him like changing size and then going through. I think that Ant-Man 1 probably still had my favorite humor out of the trilogy.
They know it was ridiculous.
Yeah. I feel like they they took, and we talked about this when we did our review, but man, for Guardians and Ant-Man, like coming out so close to each other and really steering into the comedy of it, I think that again, I think Ant-Man 1 does that way better. And then for Ant-Man 2, I'm not a huge fan of Ant-Man and the Wasp. I think a lot of it is kind of forgettable. I think it suffers from not having a good villain. And since Kang really connected with me as like an interesting villain.
What even was the bad guy in the second one?
Exactly. So it's kind of Ghost. She's more of like anti-hero. And then there's a bad guy that's trying to get some technology for some big bad organization that remains nameless. And so...
because that's how she gets the Wasp outfit. I'm remembering this now, essentially. Yeah. I remember this now.
So, yeah. So with that, I don't necessarily think... I think it is good in different ways than the first Ant-Man. But if I had to watch just one of them again, I'd probably watch Ant-Man. And then I would rewatch Quantumania. Then I would rewatch Ant-Man and the Wasp. I do feel like there are some really cool scenes in all three of those. But if I had to stack them up, that's the order I would stack them up in. So, and then I was looking at our MCU ratings that we did. And so we put Ant-Man as an A and Ant-Man and the Wasp as a B. I think for me, again, none of this is locked in until we actually do our ratings. I would probably put this as a high B. Like it's definitely above some of the other movies that we have in our B tier. And I don't quite think as a whole it jumps into that A tier for me.
Which basically answers my question, combined with earlier things you said. Is it better or worse than Black Widow?
Yes. And so, again, happy to report, significantly better than Black Widow.
Significantly better than Black Widow.
Yeah. And so, for me, I definitely fall in the camp that I do think it's a travesty that it's rated this low, kind of from a overall critic perspective. But I do, again, agree with a lot of where people have come from on it. And I agree with a lot of those general, without going too much into spoilers, I agree with those thoughts that I was seeing a lot in those reviews. And so hopefully, be it when you get back or another time, we can go and do a more spoiler cast discussion of Ant-Man. But
I'm aiming for considerably sooner than Black Panther 2.
Sometime we'll get through.
Sometime.
And then I say this every time we talk MCU. Eventually we'll need to go and update our tier list to bring in the rest of Phase 4.
Gotta do chunks of 10.
Yeah. As we learned with Book Club, we cannot do 20 in one episode.
No.
And so, but yeah, so that's my spoiler-free thoughts on Ant-Man. If you're watching over on YouTube again, you can drop a spoiler-free question, and I'll do my best to go and get those answered. Or hop in our Discord.
Do you need a hands wave?
Nah.
Okay.
But yeah, so that's what I have for this. And so, Emma, I will pass the conversation topic over to you. What you got for us this week?
The thing that we were talking about before we started, that is kind of something we don't normally talk about, but is super interesting as a general topic of conversation. So, recently, the publishers of the Roald Dahl books decided to go through and change some of its language / update some of its language to be more quote unquote inclusive. And critics are now accusing the British publishers of censorship within these books. Some of the changes that they made were updating / changing the word or phrasing enormously fat in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory to just describing the character as enormous, and so on and so forth. And it's a super interesting event happening because, on the one hand, there is a decent argument that, given the point in time that these books were released and the era that Roald Dahl lived in, you know, there's some questionable phrasing and ideas happening from whenever that was, the 40s, the 50s. Um, but on the other hand, there's the question of, well, is changing the verbiage of these books erasing the history of the world from that point in time and almost covering up the events that we should be learning from. Um, this article that I linked to in the show notes by the Chicago Tribune um, mentions that the Roald Dahl Story Company, which controls the rights to the book, said it worked with Puffin to review the text because it wanted to ensure that Dahl's wonderful stories and characters continued to be enjoyed by all children today. Um, and yet these critics, let's see, um, where is this quote that I saw earlier? Basically saying, um, let's see, it was a really good moment. Basically saying that by doing that, um, as I was saying earlier, um, oh, the changes to Dahl's books mark the latest skirmish in a debate over cultural sensitivity as campaigners seek to protect young people from cultural, ethnic, and gender stereotypes in literature and other media. Critics complain revisions to suit 21st century sensibilities risk undermining the genius of great artists and preventing readers from confronting the world as it is. Um, and the major point this article comes to is the fact that Roald Dahl passed away in 1990, and they are essentially changing his words, and it kind of goes back to something that happened, earlier, last year, I think, where Disney has started
Mm-hmm.
putting warnings up in front of some of their older films, um, where, like, I mean, in
It's kind of
this
like we
case,
no
they're,
longer believe this is no longer the company
yeah,
values, that kind
yeah,
of thing.
like here they're changing the content of the book through verbiage, whereas Disney was putting, heads up at the
Mm-hmm.
beginning of their older material. And so it's just an interesting study of how different forms of media are approaching older material that, yes, is very questionable in some of the verbiage it uses while still being, you know, as many people consider works of art. Like, everyone knows Matilda, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, um, you know, whatever. I was thinking of James and the Giant Peach, but I don't think that's Roald Dahl.
I'll
Um,
Google.
but I just clump it in with the rest of them. Um, the BFG. Gyro.
It is him.
Okay, there you go. Like a lot of those are considered classics, but at the same time, like yes, there is terrible associations with some of the wording and even with the author. But does that mean we have the right to go in and posthumously change their vision because we no longer agree with it? Or should we just give a heads up at the beginning of the item saying, hey, we are aware that some of the phrasing or content is awful just based on current cultural states. And I thought that would be a good social topic to converse about.
Yeah, I'm as you referenced it. We were talking about this at the beginning. I love that this is kind of out of our normal geeky wheelhouse. In terms of like we just talked about Ant-Man Quantumania, which is kind of the most us thing to talk about, and
Yeah.
then kind of coming into this that
Which is why I partially put this in here
yeah,
to,
I think that's
you
a
know,
super fun to, like conversation, and I'm super happy that you brought this as your topic. Yeah, because this is a weird one, and I'm probably going to end up coming off as like fence sitting here, but like Personally, I've never really been a fan of the like, our company values have changed statements when you're still making money off of the thing that you, or that would be like problematic.
Yeah.
Like that just always seemed to me like almost like you're trying to have your cake and eat it too.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I think it is still a good step, and I'm glad that companies are doing it. But to me, that always kind of seemed like well, we want to do something, and so we'll do kind of the minimum. But that being said, we also see it to what you referenced. Disney does this a lot because you can't really edit the films
Yeah.
to the same degree that like you can when you come into a book, it's much easier to edit the manuscript versus reshooting or like cutting a version of the film.
Yeah.
And so I do think that, again, I think it depends on the medium there. And so I think to me, I would have more trouble with the books, especially since these are books targeted to kids, if they just put the message at the beginning compared to it being something that, is a film or something like that. But
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I definitely, see that, and am pretty much on that boat as well. I think it would be another scenario if they essentially pulled a George Lucas and decided to update, you know, their the copies and then just try to burn all the previous editions to remove them from the world, which is essentially what Lucas has done with the older Star Wars movies, is update them and then remove the older renditions from, public consumption. Because obviously it's not a comparison, because in this case it's a matter of, cultural sensitivity in some ways in comparison to just a director having access to more resources. But I do think it would be a different scenario if they were trying to do this kind of thing completely under the table without anyone catching on, and then just trying to remove older editions. Just without anyone knowing. But I do think it is also important to, like, if they're going to make those changes, include something in the beginning that says, hey, we've made some minor changes. Like, do both, essentially. That, like, make those changes, but then also say at the beginning, we've changed some things, wording wise, because the world around us has changed, so that the audience who consumes it knows that there are some minor adjustments that aren't necessarily the authors, but that were changed for good reason.
And I think something cool there would be, hey, we made this update, but we are going to like release the initial version into, like, I don't know if public domain is the right term, but like the idea of like, hey, if you still want the original, it is here, it is available. The new version, I think that is something that they could definitely do. And I really like what you said. I think this is a great both and. Like, you very much can put that warning and make the edits and say, hey, here's why we did what we did. This was made with conversations. They reference Penguin, I think is who they said. And I really think that that's a big part. B Scouts in chat said, To Kill a Mockingbird is also a classic, but also has words that today are basically unspeakable, but are still essential to the setting of the story. So it's also admittedly been a long time since I read To Kill a Mockingbird, but to me, I have less of an issue with something like that because it is targeted at adults. And I think that there's definitely more there that we can say, hey, adults, here is what this is. Here is this book in its setting, and why that's important for us to wrestle with the sins of the past. versus something like a kid's book where like one of the other examples that they gave as a change is blah, blah, blah. I gotta scroll up back to find it. In the new edition of Witches, a supernatural female posing as an ordinary woman may be working as a top scientist or running a business instead of a cashier in a supermarket or typing letters for a businessman. A plus change. Like that's the type of stuff that like I saw that one and I was like, yes, please. Like, let's get things that are more empowering to young readers.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I think that those are the types of things that we should be seeing rather like that again, that makes me happy. I haven't read Witches, so I don't have context for that quote, but then like another example that they gave was the word black was removed from the description of the terrible tractors in 1970s The Fabulous Mr. Fox, which just had a movie, right? The machine.
Years ago.
Okay. I remember hearing that was really good, but I never saw it. The machines are now simply called murderous, brutal looking monsters. Again, I feel like that's an A plus change.
Yeah.
Like, let's take that I don't even know if that's undertones, but let's take those those undertones out of the book and like
even if they're like not intended to be, but could be conceived as such. Like
right,
and it does go back to just like if I were to start a book and it has that like heads up at the beginning, like I would still read it. But like I would be curious to then go back and like find an older edition and be like, oh, like what did they change? And then why?
Yeah.
Because then you can see like, oh yeah, I can see why they would change that and how it does impact it. But I, as a reader or consumer, would want to know that those changes had been made. Just so that I can interact with it differently.
And I don't want to say treat it like the Bible. That's definitely not what I mean. But give it like footnotes. Like I would love to see that as a way of like as you read, it's hey, we changed this line. This is what it used to be. Here's the change. Shanine in chat says some of the edits are hugely jarring. They've updated the language, but it no longer fits Dahl's voice or setting. See, like. Again, as someone who, like, I don't think I have read any of their works. I've seen a lot of the movies that these are based off of, but I have not read any of the books. So, like, I definitely don't have that context. And so, Shanine, I think that that's a really good call out. That's definitely, like, the challenge of doing something like this, especially when it's someone who is no longer making the edits to their own work. And I definitely feel like that adds a whole other wrinkle.
Which, again, is why... I don't know, I feel like having that kind of heads up at the beginning, a little note that says that can then impact, like a reader can then decide, well, do I want to read this version or the, older version? Like, it doesn't completely, change the fact that it does impact the tone and the language, but it then gives the reader the option to choose one version or the other. And would they rather want to read an updated version that's considered more inclusive, or would they want to read it in the author's intended tone and language and verbiage?
Yeah, and like wrestle with what that was for the time. And this kind of goes back to what you said earlier. I do think a big important part about this too is it's not like they're getting rid of the originals.
No.
Like, and I think that that's something, again, that I would like to see them, if they're assuming that they're going through with these edits, which they probably are, I would love to see them have that original work easy to get and have it in a way that maybe isn't even making them money, or if it is making them money, give that money to charity. Like, say, hey, we are going to give proceeds. Since we no longer agree with some of the language here, we are going to give some portion of the proceeds to a charity. I think that's something that would be really interesting for them to do. I feel like this is such a hard, like there's so many variables here. And again, having not read many of the works, it's kind of hard for me to speak to, especially, and let alone even when I have read the works, I'm not nearly the literary critic that Shanine is.
Yeah.
And so even there, I'm fully aware that I could probably read through these and not notice any of that. Whereas someone like Shanine that is much smarter in that way than I am would definitely catch that. But yeah, again, for me, like the biggest thing here too is that we are still trying to talk to kids. That this is, if the target of these, again, compared to something like To Kill a Mockingbird, which is very much targeted towards adults, whether or not it, I mean, obviously is used in schools as a teaching tool, I think that's a good benefit. But I do think that that would be that's kind of a different topic versus these that are very much targeted as some of the kids, maybe they're some of their first books that they're reading on their own. And chat Shanine says I could accept footnotes. But,
Valid.
Yeah. And this is
yeah.
Again,
Go for it.
I just think this is so interesting with it being someone who at this point passed away 30 years ago.
Yeah.
I do think that there is constantly that challenge of how do you keep the works relevant? Because for all the talk about wanting them to stay inclusive, they are still a company that is still trying to make money, which means that they did do some sort of research here. And that research came in with, hey, if we adjust these things, we'll probably sell more copies. And
absolutely.
So, I do think that there's something to understanding that side of it as well. I hate the mindset of like, oh, how dare this business try to make money? But I do think that as we look at that 30-year time gap, let alone how long it had been since the books were actually written, I do think that time gap does play a factor in it as well. With it being something that this person is not consenting to their work being edited in this way, like their company is, but like it's interesting because it's almost like a director like adapting a book. So like if we get another like Lord of the Rings adaptation in film. Adaptation as in not like Rings of Power, but actual the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Like there's going to be changes. And it's kind of interesting to think about how, as those are adapted into different works, some of the words, the language changes, versus something like this, which is kind of an adaptation just into a new edition. It's a weird way to think about it. And I don't know if that's necessarily fully what I would think if this was all explained to me in a different situation, but it's definitely something that's interesting.
So I am looking at of his full list of children's books. The first one was released in 1943, and the last one was released in 1991. I don't recognize half of them. I recognize the other half. James and the Giant Peach was 1961. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory was 64. Fantastic Mr. Fox was 1970. And it goes on. The BFG was 82. So it goes on that's a wide spread of 50 years roughly.
Mm-hmm.
But needless to say, it is a stretch of 50 years where a lot of things are happening. So, there's a lot of change. Dog, you cannot have that. I know, that is mine. You cannot chew that. But it is a change of 50 years through which a whole bunch of different cultural things are happening. So, and, tones change. But even at that point, by the 90s, things were better, but not to the point in which they are at today.
Yeah.
So. Okay, now he has a rock. That's slightly better. He can have the rock.
Less likely to cause harm to the rock. Hopefully it does not smash things with it. So.
Yeah.
But Yeah, I think that this is a super interesting and very nuanced conversation that, like, again, I think this is the type of conversation that, like, I am really interested to hear what other people have to say. That, like, again, I kind of, like, as part of this being our podcast where we're talking about it, like, we've kind of shared our thoughts, but it's definitely something that I'm very interested into to how other people would think about this. Again, especially on my end, as someone who, like, is not much of a literary, like, analyst. I don't know if that's the right term, but, like, as somebody
Works
that,
for me.
yeah, like, that's just, like, not my skill set. That's not my forte. This is definitely something that I'd be very interested to read and kind of see some, like, and maybe this is something that's out there that I can Google, like, find some, like, good faith arguments for both sides. And so I'm definitely would be interested in seeing that, and kind of seeing, especially more of, like, a side by side, but of the changes in more of their context. Because, again, I just don't have that personally.
Absolutely.
People who are watching, let us know what you think about this. You can also drop that in the comments, like your spoiler-free Ant-Man questions. Let us know. And yeah, happy to take a look at those as well. That's going to bring us to the end of episode 228 of First Geek 411. As I said at the top, because Emma is now an ant and will not be here on Thursday, we are going to delay book club. So we'll be doing Children of the Nameless by Brandon Sanderson at a later time to be announced. Potentially next Monday, maybe a coming up Thursday. We might, maybe skip a month and just do it in March. We'll see. But stay tuned. We'll get some announcements out for what that is going to be, as well as whatever our next book club is going to be. And then, as a reminder, Children of the Nameless is free. There's the PDF over in our Discord, as well as a link to the YouTube audiobook. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And so it's in 2 halves. It's a pretty quick listen. I think it's only about 3 hours total, unless you live the 2 times speed life like I live. And so...
yes, Janine, I am indeed a bug now.
Yes,
and
Emma
have not actually any relations to a child that was born at some point within the last 36 hours.
And so ties in perfectly, thinking Emma is going to be the next main character in Ant-Man 4. And so
I will take it. As long as I get to direct and or be the editor. That is my one stipulation. And so, but yeah, with that, that's going to be episode 228. We are First Geek 411. You can find us on our social media, join our Discord server, shoot us an email at 1stgeek411@gmail.com. Check out our Redbubble store and watch live on Twitch, and find our videos over on YouTube where you can like, comment, and subscribe. And then if you want to find us, if you also want to find us at our personal social media, is a great way to do that. Man, here we are at the end of the episode. You're doing great, Cameron.
And so you can find us there. My personal social media is Humar Whittill.
Mine is I am not prepared with an eye as I fight the dog.
And with that, it has been a great week.
Yeah, it has. Pet a dog.
I love you.